Soldiers march into the holiest place in Jerusalem. They set up an altar to a foreign god on top of the temple's own altar. They sacrifice a pig on it, an animal the entire nation considers unclean, in front of a horrified priesthood powerless to stop it. This isn't a scene from a movie. It isn't a prediction of something still to come. It's something that actually happened, and it's directly connected to a phrase people online treat like an unsolved, still future mystery. Here's the fast answer, before anything else. The historical event most commonly associated with Daniel's abomination of desolation occurred in 1670 BC. We know exactly which king stood behind it because he left his own face and a divine title stamped on coins that survive to this day, preserved in museum collections around the world. But that's not the whole story, because centuries later, Jesus quoted that same phrase and applied it to something still future from his own perspective. Three different things are tangled together here: what actually happened, what Jesus actually said, and how people interpret it. Untangling those three is where this actually gets interesting. Rewind 3 weeks earlier than that altar scene, so to speak, back to where this phrase actually comes from. The Hebrew language behind the phrase is built around shikutz, an abomination or detestable thing, and shomem, desolation or devastation. Daniel uses related forms of this language in Daniel 9:27, 11:31, and 12:11, describing something connected with the holy place that brings devastation and interrupts proper worship. For centuries, Jewish and Christian readers alike have connected this language to one particular historical figure, long before it became a subject for online speculation. A Greek king named Antiochus IV, ruler of the Seleucid Empire in the 2nd century BC. Here's where the coin becomes relevant. Antiochus used an official title on his currency, Antiochus Epiphanes, God Manifest. His own face appeared on the coinage, alongside a royal identity built on the language of divine manifestation, a powerful claim in the religious and political world of the Hellenistic age. Scholars debate exactly how literally rulers of that era meant language like this. Ancient kings often used divine language in ways that could express divine favor, royal ideology, or something more explicit. But whatever the precise theological weight, the message stamped into metal and passed hand to hand across his kingdom was unmistakable. A king presenting his royal identity in language associated with the divine. It's worth being precise about what a coin like that actually proves, since metal can't testify to everything on its own. It proves the king's own titulature, the divine language he claimed for himself. It doesn't prove what happened inside the temple. The historical sources document that separately. Keeping those two kinds of evidence distinct is exactly what makes this argument strongest. In 167 BC, according to 1st Maccabees, 2nd Maccabees, and the historian Josephus, the Antiochus crisis reached the Jerusalem temple. His forces and officials imposed pagan worship there, setting up a pagan installation upon the altar of burnt offerings. Ancient sources associate the imposed worship with Zeus, though the precise form of the installation is described with some variation. Josephus describes swine being sacrificed in connection with the desecration, a particularly deliberate violation of Jewish law since pigs were considered unclean. Antiochus's regime also outlawed circumcision and Sabbath observance under penalty of death and burned copies of the law wherever his officials found them. This wasn't an abstract or symbolic controversy. It was calculated, public desecration of the most sacred space in Judaism, carried out under a king whose own coinage used the language of divine manifestation. Picture standing in Jerusalem that year. A foreign king's soldiers have taken control of the temple. The altar is now associated with a pagan cult. Forbidden sacrifices are being offered. The practices your ancestors preserved for generations are suddenly illegal. The crisis behind the phrase wasn't an abstract theological puzzle invented centuries later in a classroom. It had a face, a coin, a date, and a real historical crisis attached to it, lived through by people whose names most of us will never know. One of the earliest surviving interpretations of Daniel's language connects it directly to this crisis. First Maccabees uses strikingly similar desolating abomination language for what happened to the altar, language that closely echoes Daniel's own wording, written within living memory of the events themselves. Scholars do divide on when Daniel's book reached its final written form, some placing it near this same crisis, others maintaining a much earlier 6th century date. That dating question is worth being honest about rather than glossing over. But it doesn't change what happened at the temple in 167 BC, which is documented independently across sources with their own distinct perspectives. So, if this already happened, why does it still get treated online like a locked mystery waiting for a future headline? Partly simple unfamiliarity. Most people have never heard of Antiochus, so a phrase with a real, documented answer gets treated like it has none. An empty space in someone's knowledge often gets filled with speculation instead of a library card and an afternoon of reading. But here's the actual twist, and it's the reason this story doesn't end quietly in 1670 BC. In Matthew 24:15, centuries later, Jesus deliberately invokes the same abomination of desolation language, spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, and tells his listeners to watch for it as something still ahead of them, urgent enough to warrant fleeing to the mountains the moment it appeared. That's not Jesus repeating settled ancient history for its own sake. That's Jesus applying Daniel's language to an event he presents as still future from where he himself was standing. So the real question isn't, did the abomination happen? History already answers that clearly. A major desecration occurred in 1670 BC, and that part is settled. The harder question is what Jesus intended when he used Daniel's language again centuries later. A later event following the Antiochus pattern? The Roman destruction of the temple in 70 AD, a generation later, or a pattern capable of recurring more than once across history? That's a theological and interpretive question, not simply a historical one, and the two shouldn't be collapsed into each other. The fact that something happened in 1667 BC doesn't automatically settle what Jesus meant in Matthew 24, but the fact that Jesus later reused the language doesn't erase the historical event that gave the phrase its most famous ancient context. Both things can be true, and serious interpreters land in genuinely different places on the second question, which is worth holding honestly rather than picking a side too fast just to sound certain on camera. What's not up for real debate is 167 BC itself. The desecration comes to us through the ancient written accounts. Together with the coin's material evidence, those sources give us a remarkably concrete picture. A king, a temple, a desecrated altar, a forbidden cult, a date, and a phrase from Daniel that later generations would continue to debate. Every proposed fulfillment of this phrase describes the same basic shape, something sacred violated by someone claiming authority they were never owed. Claiming a place that isn't yours, calling yourself something you're not, sitting where only God belongs. The names change, the empires change, the coins change design, but the temptation remains. That's the deeper warning running underneath the history. The danger begins the moment something created starts demanding the allegiance that belongs only to the Creator. Antiochus put divine language on his coin in his own century with his own name attached, confident enough to mint it into permanence. The question for every generation since isn't only who once claimed to be divine, it's also what, right now in my own life, is quietly claiming ultimate authority over me. So here's what I'd genuinely like to know. Does the documented history make this phrase feel more grounded and less speculative to you? Or does the ongoing debate about its later fulfillment still leave you wanting a cleaner answer than history is willing to give? I'd like to hear where you land in the comments. Next time, we're staying in Revelation, looking at a word almost everyone mistranslates in their head before they even read it, apocalypse, and what it actually meant before it became a synonym for disaster. That's next.